Hi, welcome to the Interviews with the Hunting Masters, brought to you by the OutdoorInsiders.com, your number one spot for inside information and quality gear. This week, we're going to do something a little different. I get a lot of questions about in-field meat care. We get tons of questions about recipes and what to do with, your deer and your elk. And, I went to the guy that I know that knows the most about this, and that's Hank Shaw of Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook. And Hank is a renowned chef and cookbook author, as well as Hunter. What's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We actually we tried to connect a couple times, but it didn't work out for us.
Technology's not all it's cracked up to be.
Yes, it has its tendencies to fail when you need it the most. So, well, I understand that you got a coues deer hunt coming up this fall here in Arizona.
I do. I'm pretty excited about it. It's in area 34A, if I remember right, and it's the December 1st to the 10th hunt, which I've never hunted big game in Arizona before, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Well, a cool thing about that hunt, actually, I'm glad this year they moved it a little bit later. It used to start in end of November and roll into like the last 3 days of December. So the further along in December you go, typically the better you are getting some rutting activity. And with the colder weather, you just get a little bit more movement. I feel like the bucks get up on the feet and cruise a little bit more. It should be a good hunt. One crappy thing about that hunt is that there's a lot of private land to navigate around, and it's all like on the outskirts of the unit, so it's kind of tough to access. But once you got into the public land, then there's just giant tracts of public land. The other thing is they give a lot of tags, and it's a popular unit for Tucsonians. A lot of Tucson people like to hunt that because it's close to home.
Right.
So, you got your work cut out for you, but there's some good bucks in there. They've taken some giants out of there over the years. Matter of fact, I want to say that the archery world record was taken in that unit.
Crazy.
Yeah. It's like
probably in somebody's backyard.
152. Not quite. Actually, it was on Mount Fagan, which is the biggest mountain in there. So, yeah, but no, there's some good ones in there. I've chased a couple of really good ones. It's been quite some time since I hunted that unit, but one of the last times I was in there, and this was a December archery hunt, but I chased a couple that were, pushing that 120 range. So you got a good opportunity to shoot something good. If not, shoot something small and take home something good.
Yeah, I mean, my goals. I'd like to get something bigger than a forked horn, but that's kind of my goal. But that's if it's a forked horn, it's a forked horn.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you've heard this before. But any coues is a trophy. So definitely your first one. I wouldn't sweat it too much. Next time you come back, we'll make sure we'll get you a nice rack if it doesn't work out the first time. So cool. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into some of these questions I got for you.
Sure. So I'm a former restaurant cook. I'm a former newspaper journalist. I've only really been hunting for about 16 years now. So I came to hunting later in life. But I've got enough years under my belt where I feel I'm more than a little competent because I don't know if you've ever heard of the zeal of a convert, but I definitely had it. And so now, I mean, I think I spend something on the order of maybe 60 to 90 days afield every year chasing various game animals, big and small.
Yep.
I do a ton of duck hunting, and what I do for a living is I run the website Hunter Angler Gardener Cook, which is to my knowledge, it is the largest source of wild food recipes on the internet. Basically, if you can't buy it in the store, I probably have some information about it. So everything from wild mushrooms, which are hitting very hard in Arizona right now because of the monsoons, to wild plants and nuts and berries, that sort of stuff, to all the game animals, to fish and shellfish and freshwater and saltwater. And so that's basically been my niche for 10 years now. I mean, the Hunter Angler Gardener Cook this is its 10th year. And I'm pretty psyched about that because there's not a lot of websites out there that have stood the test of time like that. And I've got 3 cookbooks in print. The most recent one is very relevant to what we're talking about. It's called Buck Moose, and it is a guide to all things venison. So everything, basically, I pick up on this book as soon as the animal hits the ground, and from field care all the way to butchering and storage, and there's over 100 recipes in it as well. And that book and my other books they're on Amazon or in bookstores, that sort of thing. So they're you don't have to write to me to get them or anything. They should be available wherever fine books are sold.
Nice. I'm sure you can hear my son crying in the background.
He's sad he doesn't have a copy of the book in his hand.
Yeah, I've been trying to not do podcasts from the house when my wife and children are home, but it just doesn't work out that way. You got to always work around other people's schedule and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, and I don't have an office outside of the house anymore. I moved my office into the home and a couple years ago, and I got no desire to spend money to have an office outside the house, except for dealing with that once in a while. But
yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, it's so much nicer just to roll out of bed in your chonies and go take care of something that you got to take care of. Although there is something to be said about having your own space and not being bombarded every 2 seconds by other people. But anyway, I digress. I'm glad you brought up, field care and stuff. That's some of the questions that I have for you. And you also mentioned the mushrooms. I'm actually going to start off with this question. This came to me recently. And it almost felt like a survivalist question, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask Hank this because you deal with a lot of the foraging and stuff like that as well. And I was asked if I had to learn 3 plants in North America that I can use and pretty much find almost any state, what would those 3 plants be? And and that was for a food source, by the way. And the only one that I could think of was dandelion. But
yeah, dandelion would be one of them. Acorns would be another. Okay. Acorns are I believe they are in every one of the lower 48 states. Mm-hmm. And so acorns would be a pretty good starch source as well. I have extensive directions on how to deal with acorns on the website. That would be certainly one. Dandelions would be fun, but it's just a green and it's a root vegetable as well. So that's a pretty good one in terms of versatility. Your other third one would be, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say brambles. So
really?
Bramble fruit. So it's basically a catch-all term for raspberries, blackberries, salmon berries, Marion berries, dewberries, all that kind of stuff, because almost every state has them somewhere. Mm-hmm. And they're very easy to identify, and none of them are toxic. So if you ever see a fruit that looks like a raspberry or a blackberry in the wild, it's edible. It's one of those no-fail ones.
Okay. Not blueberries. Don't go eating like nightshades or whatever the hell they're called.
Well, there are several edible nightshades, but yeah, there are some that are not. Those are harder. They're still not rocket science, but the bramble fruits are easier.
Yeah. So they look like a blueberry, blackberry, or raspberry. Okay.
The key on anything in the blueberry family, if you are interested in going that route, because there's tons of them, is to just memorize what a store-bought blueberry looks like. And specifically, there's a crown on the blossom end of the berry. So they're never smooth berries. There's always that little crown on the base end of the berry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see that, that's the vaccinium clan, and that's all of the huckleberries, blueberries, bilberries. There's tons and tons of different varieties, but that's the one thing you have to remember on that one. Now, somebody listening to this is going to forget it, and so that's why the bramble fruit's easier, because that's a gateway drug for foraging.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move into the other stuff, the guys. So let's talk about infield care, and let's start from the second that you shoot an animal. From that point on, once you found it, rather, I should say, because if you shot it and you haven't found it yet, it doesn't do you any good.
Right.
But once you found it, to getting it home, what are you doing? What should we be doing?
Well, the prime directive is to get it cool. Is to cool the carcass as fast and as completely as possible without freezing it.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you need to do that. So depending on the temperature out there, it's everything from gut and skin and getting a cooler to just gutting to gut and skin and put in the back of the truck. So you want to keep that carcass as cool as possible. And I think the universal would be, gut it in the field. Don't, unless you're right near a ranch, you can deal with it in the next 15, 20 minutes, half hour, then no problem, because then you're in good shape. And in fact, that's some of the best deer that you'll have is kind of ranch deer, because you can salvage a lot more of the meat when you've got a hose and buckets and bowls and things kicking around than if you're in the backcountry.
Right.
But regardless of what you do, drop the guts, and then until and unless you have steady access to water that is below 40 degrees. 40 degrees is a very important temperature, because that is the bottom end of when bacteria start to be able to flourish. And 60 degrees is then you're starting to get into sort of rapid decomposition, and 80 degrees is worse, and 100 degrees is worse, and so on and so forth, until you get to 140, and then they die. So, but then so would we.
Right.
So water is your enemy until and unless you get cold water. So like hosing out with if you hang a deer and you're back at the ranch and you hose it out, that's no problem, because you can then dry it and then get it cool right away. But you don't want to wash it in a stream. You don't want to wash it, God forbid, wash it in a pond.
Oh, no.
Or even the water that's in your bottles. Can you use it in a pinch? Sure you can. So an example of breaking that no water rule in the bush would be, I've slightly gut shot this deer. I'm gutting it, and there's nastiness on the inside of the cavity, but I've got a big water bottle. What you would then do is you've got the carcass all gutted out, and it's of course slick with blood. So then what you do is you'd either sacrifice some cloth, or if you had paper towels, which would be the two best options, you can then sort of wipe it down and then dry it again. Or if you don't have paper towels or some cloth that you can sacrifice, find some leaves of a plant that's not toxic, like oak leaves or something like that, and then use that to wipe out the inside. But in general, it's better to let it dry a bit. And in fact, if you have a lot of people listening to this know who Steve Rinella is, and Steve has a TV show called Meat Eater, and he and I did a hunt for that show on one point, and it was in my area. It was in the interior mountain ranges of the coastal ranges of Northern California, so it's very hot and dry. And the animals that we shot there, we skinned and gutted and hung up underneath an oak tree, and it was hot. I mean, it was downright hot. But once that you get that rind on the outside, the meat was fine. It's meat is a bit more durable. than you might think, but it still doesn't like to be wet and warm.
Right. Right. You get that little skin on there, crust up or whatever, and it usually. It's funny because our mutual friend Charles, when he shot his blacktail with me this year, we hung it up, and it was pretty hot that day. But we hung it up in the shade, and like you could go and touch the meat, and it actually felt cold. You know, it's amazing.
Shade
just
and
a little
breeze
bit
are
of shades. Yeah, I was saying amazing how a little shade and breeze will.
Oh yeah.
You know, well, I mean, think about yourself. You step out in the sun, and see how you feel. Step in the shade. You know, it's quite a bit of difference.
Especially with you being in Arizona.
Oh my God, it's miserable. It's so humid right now. Which
because of your monsoons.
Yeah, combined with the 110 degree weather is just not. Yeah, I can't wait to get out of here. I'm less than. Let's see, what time is it? It's 12:30. I'm pretty much. I'm out of here in less than 15 hours. I'm gonna be
good for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but speaking of going to colder places, you have the reverse issue if you're hunting deer or moose or whatever in very cold places is you have to prevent the carcass from freezing. And that's normally not a problem, but sometimes it is. I've met some Minnesota deer hunters who they'll hang the carcass, they'll gut the carcass and hang it even in the hide overnight. But if it's 40 below, you're going to have a crispy critter on the next day, and that goes a long way to ruining meat quality. And so, which gets into another care issue that a lot of people ask about, and that is freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing in meat. And that's you want to avoid that at all costs. I mean, obviously you have to at some point, but you don't want the double freeze thaw. And the reason is because, as we all know, ice is bigger than water. So water expands when it freezes. And what happens in flesh is that it will break all those cell membranes. And so whenever you have defrosted a piece of backstrap or a duck breast or something, and you see that stuff that looks like blood, it's not actually blood. It's myoglobin. It's just, they call it serum. And it's what leaks out of the meat after all of those cell walls in that piece of meat have been ruptured by the ice. And this is with the moisture that should be in your meat leaking out into the sink. So if you do this multiple times, not only do you have more damage, but you also, depending on how you thawed it, have a potential bacterial risk as well.
Yikes. Well, let's what's your, so you and I have talked about this a couple of times. Explain what cutting up a deer or an elk or whatever while it's in rigor does to the quality of the meat.
That's called shortening. It's a butcher's term. So the one thing you never want to do is cut something in rigor. There is even certain kinds of fish that will actually get tough if you cut them in rigor. Typically, fish meat is soft enough where it doesn't really matter that much to you, but animal meat it absolutely will. So if you've ever heard of or had the misfortune of eating, so let's just say a piece of backstrap from a pig or a deer or something, and it's tough. Like there's almost no circumstance where backstrap should be tough, and especially if the animal was, let's say, a doe or a button buck or just a young animal. The craziest thing about it is, why should this thing be tough? Well, the chances are you cut it during rigor. So here's what happens. So if you hold your arm out stiff, and imagine somebody taking a knife to your bicep. I know it's gruesome, but if you think about it. So if you hold your arm out stiff and somebody, let's say, cut your bicep right where your elbow is, it's going to roll up like a Venetian blind. And what is that muscle's going to contract. And this is the same thing happens when you're working with muscles that are in rigor. So that's the one thing you never ever want to do, and it's almost impossible to deal with. I mean, you could cook the hell out of it, but you don't want to cook the hell out of a backstrap, right? So you pretty much you're hosed. You make Chinese food, you can cut it up into little pieces, you can deal with it that way. But in terms of it being a steak, there's nothing much you can do. I mean, you can pound it, but short of mechanical tenderization methods, there's nothing you can do. So you want to get it either before it goes in rigor, and this is important for backcountry hunters. So if you have the opportunity to get on that animal before it stiffens up, which, most of the time you can, that's when you cut it into quarters. Mm-hmm. So when you cut it into quarters before it goes in, or if you're going to bone it out, if you can, by any chance, the butcher's term for it is hot boning, which sounds like it's porn, but it's not. But to hot bone an animal, which essentially means boning it out while the animal's still warm.
Right.
If you can do that, that is ideal, because if you do that, you avoid the shortening problem, mm-hmm. and you also there are naturally occurring phosphates that are in muscle meat that dissipate through rigor, so they go away. Okay. Phosphates are that's overstating the case. Phosphates are extremely important to allow meat to bind to itself. So for sausage makers out there, if you were to make sausage out of hot bone meat that has never been frozen, the bind quality of that meat is going to be exponentially better than meat that has been thawed. And it's remarkable, the difference for it. And so for backcountry hunters, this is actually kind of an advantage. And here's the thing: if you cut big old honks of meat, like a whole backstrap or like a big old chunk of hind leg, you can age it then. You don't have to age on the bone. It helps, but you don't have to. Okay. So for those of us who don't have either option, you need to get the animal cool and get it into a cooler so that it's bacterially safe, and just chill, drink a few beers and drive home or whatever, and figure out how you're going to eat the animal, and give it a day or even two before you start really butchering it. And that lets it get fully through rigor.
Okay. Makes sense. So yeah, I don't know, in the past few years, I've been doing the Gutless Method basically. And, if I find them fast enough, I'm doing this. And just pulling all the meat off, put it in a backpack and going. But I don't know that I ever really checked to see if they were in rigor or not. I'm sure there was a couple that probably were.
I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal.
No, but I hear you. It sucks because, let's face it. For the average Joe, wild game meat's a little bit harder to work with as it is, because you're not used to it.
Right.
And it doesn't have the fat quality content that you have in beef or pork. So you want to do anything and everything possible to limit, things going wrong.
Exactly.
But is there a rule of thumb? I don't even know this. I don't know why. I feel actually kind of embarrassed that I don't know this. Is there a rule of thumb of how long it takes for an animal to go in rigor, or is it just it depends
on size? Okay. It depends on the size and depends on the temperature. But in general, 24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
Fish are way faster.
So you got quite a bit of time before they go in rigor. I feel like
before they go in, or when they come out?
I was going to say, go into rigor. I was going to say.
When they go into rigor, it can be as little as 5 hours.
Okay. All right. As little as 5 hours. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of it even being less than that. But
yeah, I was going to say, I feel like the elk I shot in November last year, it took us about an hour and a half to find him. But I want to say when we got to him, he was all stiffy-legged. He was really hard to move around. Let's just put it that way. He was really, the elk are always hard to move around to begin with, but I feel like I couldn't get his legs to go where I wanted. He was probably starting to get stiff. So, but for me, 5 hours sounds like a pretty good window. I mean, hell, if you can't get on your animal and get them processed out when we're hot boned, I'm gonna hashtag hot bone. If you can't get them hot boned out before, in 5 hours, then there's a problem. You obviously didn't make a good shot, so you got more to deal with than to worry about how stiff your meat's gonna be.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get two East Coast boys on the phone. Oh man! All right, so cool. We took care of the meat. We got it back home. We cared for it properly. I get asked this all the time, and what's the best? I mean, of course, this is an opinion thing, I think, more than anything, but because you could ask this to somebody with regular steak, beef steak, and you're going to get a different answer. But what's the best temperature to serve venison?
I think in general, most people are going to be very, very happy if you take it off. I mean, this is backstrap. This is a steak.
Right, steak. Sorry, guys.
If you take it off the heat at 130.
Okay.
If you take it off the heat at 130 and let it rest, it'll kick up to about 135, which is a solid medium rare. And that will please the largest number of people. So you can, if it hits 140, that's a solid medium, which is a little bit over for some people and under for some. You hit rare, like a dead rare, where you pull it off at like 120. That is, I mean, that's too undercooked for some people. It's perfectly safe, but it's just a question of what you like. And I mean, when I cook venison backstrap or ducks or geese for people, I shoot for 130 and then let it rest. Now, if it's a big roast, so there's always a but and an if, right? So there's
right.
It's like life. There are no absolutes. So if it's a big old hind leg roast, like a 3-pound or 4-pound roast, well, if you cook that to 130, the thermal inertia, more science, the thermal inertia of that big piece of meat is such that it could gain another 10 to even 15 degrees. So the bigger the meat, the longer the rest.
Okay.
And the lower you want to take it off. So I've had 5-pound elk roasts that I've taken off at 120, and I let them rest for 15 minutes, and they were perfect.
Okay.
So another thing about resting is if you took the meat off and it's a little low, so you're like, I don't know, it's a little low, tent it loosely with foil. If you took the meat off and it's about right, don't tent it.
Makes sense. I've actually heard that taking it off a little sooner and tinting it with foil actually adds moisture. I mean, or I guess what, escaping less moisture? Well,
but it also kills your crust.
Okay.
So it's called bark.
As I say, it's probably, it makes the outside soggy.
That's correct. Which isn't, again, it's not the end of the world, but in general, if you've cooked your backstrap properly, it doesn't need to be tinted with foil because you're only going to wait 5 minutes anyway.
Yeah. I have a hard time waiting 2 minutes anyway.
If you do have a hard time waiting 2 minutes, cook it dead rare because there's another crazy little science trick involved. So the temperature at which the meat proteins coagulate is medium rare. So once those meat proteins denatures, I guess is officially what they would be doing. Once they denature, then you have to rest the meat. Otherwise you get massive moisture loss. But if you cook a piece of meat dead rare, like 120, it's not even medium rare, they haven't coagulated or denatured yet. So you don't have to rest it. Science.
There you go. Alton Brown over here.
One of my idols.
Nice. Um,
He's a Georgia boy and a hunter too.
yeah, yeah. I've actually, I reached out to him. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago because I heard that he hunted. Um, I was actually I invited him onto my TV show. I wanted to see if he wanted to come out hunting, but I never actually connected with him. Too many gatekeepers, you know.
Yeah. He and I have
So,
talked on Twitter a couple of times, but that's about it.
yeah, yeah. Nowadays it's like you don't even know who's running whose social media account anyway. You know, it's like, is it really them? It's,
It's true.
you never know. But yeah, no, I thought it would be cool. Who's another who likes to hunt is Guy Fieri. What likes to hunt?
Oh yeah.
I watched something where he went on like was it grizzly bear hunt or yeah, I think it was a grizzly bear hunt. Like I don't think it's like something he does like super regularly, but I think he enjoys it.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's a duck hunter because he's from Northern California.
Yeah. Me too. And I think Andrew Zimmerman maybe.
Oh, I've hunted with Andrew Zimmern. I've taken him hunting.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah,
we took him dove hunting.
He seems like a cool guy. He's up for adventure all the time.
The only difference between Andrew on TV and off TV is more dirty jokes.
Nice.
He tells a mean off-color joke.
I bet. Another question I guess, or questions I get is always about curing, and I know zero. I know zero about curing.
You're
I should say
Italian.
zero. I was going to say it's not zero because I grew up. My parents, we used to make salami, and we did a prosciutto here and there when I was a kid. My parents did a lot of jarring of tomatoes and making eggplant, and we did a lot of that kind of stuff. The processes have slipped me. They've eluded my brain because I don't practice it, and my parents haven't done it in years, especially ever since we moved to Arizona. We really haven't done much here, and mainly I think it's much more difficult unless you have the right cellar to do it in. Back in Brooklyn, for some reason you could make a nice my uncles always had wine cellars and with cheese and wine and salami and all kinds of stuff in there. It was always the right temperature,
Oh yeah. I mean, East Coast basements are legendary for that.
Yeah. But yeah, that don't happen. We don't even have basements over here. It's very few houses
we don't
have
either.
basements. Very few houses have basements.
So I'll run you through this, but this is going to be like drinking from a fire hose. So the two source materials that I would refer you guys to are all of my books. Every one of my books has a substantial section on meat curing. Buck Moose, the venison cookbook, that probably has the largest section on meat curing. So there's all of this detail is in that, and you can also find specific recipes for meat curing on Hunter Angler Gardener Cook. So with that, your salami and meat curing can be as easy as making bacon, or it can be pretty tricky. Actual salami is not the easiest thing in the world to make, but nor is it rocket science. I would suggest everybody out there start with something like a brasaiola, which is typically cut from the eye round of the hind leg. So if you're elk hunters or moose hunters, or if you get a very big deer, it's a muscle in the hind leg that looks a little bit like a tenderloin. It's a cylinder of muscle. It's not nearly as tender as a tenderloin, but it looks like that. I've actually called it the neighbor's tenderloin.
Yeah.
Because if a neighbor's like, oh, give me some of that elk backstrap. Come on, I want some of that elk backstrap. I'm like, here you go. They never ask again. But it's a cylinder of meat that has the grain always goes in one direction, and which makes it excellent for slicing later. So that is all that is you're salting it and using spices and such. The cure is the salt and the curing salt, and the curing salt is either sodium nitrite or sodium nitrate. And anybody who thinks that there are nitrite-free products like bacon and such, you are being lied to. Sorry, you're just being lied to, because what they're using is celery powder, and there's more nitrites in a stick of celery than you typically would use in a 5-pound batch of salami. And that's the dirty little secret they don't want you to know. So nitrates are nitrates. Do you either get them at a precisely measured mix like Instacure number 1 or number 2, or you can use celery powder and take your chances. So that's my rant. I could go on that one, but I won't.
No, that's good to know, because my wife's always like, "Oh, we need to get this for the kids."
Yeah,
like,
it's ridiculous. It really actually gets me mad, because it's just an outright lie. It's a 100% lie.
There's so many of those out there, especially in food and health.
Oh yeah, there are. Like, the whole fish thing where, like, what fish are you eating? Oh, it's a snapper. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to curing. You cure, you use these salts for various reasons. I mean, primarily to stop things like botulism and listeria and bacterial growth and that kind of stuff. But the salt and sugar as well. So this is why you see sugar in a lot of cures as well. Both salt and sugar will pull moisture out of whatever it is they're coating.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we talked about it about 10 minutes ago. Moisture over the 40-degree mark is bad, because it provides a solution in which bad bacteria can live. And so the entire point of curing meats is to rob that meat of enough moisture to make an unhealthy environment for bacteria that can hurt you. So whole muscles are always easier, like the Iran we were talking about, or you could cure backstrap. I do a lot of wild pig backstrap, make Lonzino out of it. Another easy one would be a goose breast. That's an easy project. So these are kind of your starter kit things if you're going to do old school Italian curing. The Italians tend to not do a lot of smoking until you get to the Alps. Once you get to the Alps and farther north, that's where the climate is different. So then smoking becomes an entirely different way to preserve. And cured smoked products are always cold smoked. So like salmon, for example, cold smoked salmon is salted down salmon so that it's been cured with salt and sugar until it loses a particular amount of moisture to make it firm. And then it is put in a cool, smoky environment, sometimes for days and not all day. So I know guys up in Alaska who will smoke sides of salmon. They're already cured, and then they get a little bath of smoke every day for a week, and then they're ready to. Then they actually are preserved for weeks and weeks and weeks. Hot smoking doesn't do that. Hot smoking is effectively barbecue.
Yeah,
and
so say it cooks.
Yeah, and it will keep for a week or 10 days, but it's not going to keep for a month.
Right.
So the same will go through if you do that with venison or with any other kind of game meat. So salami, the added difficulty is you don't need a starter culture, but it's a good idea to have one. I always use them. And you buy these starter cultures pre-made from places like the Sausage Maker or Butcher and Packer. There are a few other companies that have them. And you use these when you're doing home batches at a much greater concentration than you would by reading the package. This is the most common question I get with salami. Is like, why do you use 4 times as much starter culture as what's called for in the package? Well, because first of all, it doesn't hurt anything. Second of all, in small batches done by normal humans and not professionals, the chance of you not getting enough bacteria into every single link that you do is very high. And so you could have 1 or 2 or more of them go off on you. And it's just insurance. And it costs $8, whatever, spend it. And then you need a place to hang. You need to hang your links in a place that's cool but not cold, and humid but not too humid. And most people do that in a wine fridge. I've got an old fridge I bought on Craigslist with a humidistat and a thermostat inside it. So you have to. There's some capital expense if you want to start it, but it's absolutely worth your time and effort.
Right.
And it takes years. I mean, this is not something that you can make passable salami your first time.
Yeah.
But it takes years to be good at it.
I definitely want to try a bresaola. It's one of my favorites. It's still like, I think I remember telling you the story that the first time I was introduced to it, I was in Italy. I was with my older cousin, and he took me to this like pork store, Salamaria, and I tried some, and it was it was served with like arugula and a little lemon and salt and whatever. But and he was explaining to me that it was made from the neck of red deer, red stag. So it was the neck muscles, like the bugler muscles, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just fantastic. And I was like, oh, when I got back to the States, I looked for it everywhere. Of course, the only place I could find it was in New York. So I had my family ship me over some from New York to Arizona, and now it's all over the place. But back then, Phoenix has become quite the culinary center spot in the States. I feel like
it's come a long way even in just 5 years.
There's a lot of excellent restaurants and a lot of diverse food here. When I first moved here, you might as well have been living in a third world country, because if you didn't eat Mexican, it was hamburgers and pizza, and the pizza sucked
until Pizzeria Bianco came along.
Oh, Pizzeria Bianco! Oh man, that place is the best. I've known the family for a long time, and he is married to one of my good friends, actually, Mia, his wife. We kind of grew up together, so she's
nice.
She's a wonderful, wonderful girl, and they're very good people, and their pizza's amazing. But yeah, I guess Phoenix actually just got rated like one of the number one places to go get like wood-fired pizza in the country.
Well, yeah, I think Pizzeria Bianco actually has a Michelin star.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's several other places here that are they're not, I wouldn't say as good, but pretty damn close. And then Andreoli over here, he speaking of cured meats, he makes his own prosciutto, and he does his own soprasat and all that stuff. And he does it super old school, uses the old horse bone to test to see if it's right, by all that. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. But I got a good friend in New York, actually, Dominic Papandrea, and he owns a pork store in Middletown.
Of course he does.
Yeah. And he makes some excellent stuff. He made me a soprasat with elk and beef. We used beef fat with elk because I can't really eat pork. I can, but I can't eat a lot.
You are a bad Italian, aren't you?
Yeah, man. If I eat pork past noon, I'm not sleeping that night. And if I am sleeping, I got the freaking meat sweats bad. It messes with me. It kind of makes my joints hurt a little bit.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's fucking terrible. I mean, it really is, because there's so many things that I miss eating that I'll cheat. I'll have something here and there. Like the other day, I had a little capicola and stuff my cousin had out. I was like, yeah, I gotta have some of this. But
that's a shame, because the best meat to grind with game meats is pork fat.
Yeah. Oh, I know for sure. This butcher in New York, and I can't remember the guy's name. I dropped off a deer to him, and this is before I knew I was allergic to pork. I had him turn all my ground into sausage because it was just easier. And I'm not big on deer grind anyway, but I like elk ground meat, but I don't like the deer as much. And he made me a bunch of like salami and sausage, and the salami that he made was pork and deer, and it was just, you wouldn't even know you were eating deer meat. It was just like, it was like eating straight, like, hard cured salami.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that. I do that too. The recipe the recipe in Buck Moose is that recipe. It's a venison, pork, and pork fat, very basic, very simple, like a Toscano salami.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a good sort of way to get started in that. And it's the reason why I end up liking to use some pork in these products is I used to not, and I've changed my mind because typically you can get pretty good quality, never frozen pork meat. And back to what I was talking about 10, 15 minutes ago, is the binding power of pork is higher than that of venison. And fresh pork with thawed out venison, the salami or the sausage that you make from it is going to bind to itself far better than if it was just deer meat and pork fat. So there's a reason beyond flavor to put a little bit of fresh pork meat in with your venison sausages of any kind.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't pork fat itself also have a little bit higher melting temperature? So like it stays less, it doesn't start melting as quickly as like say beef fat does. So
no, it's the other way around.
Oh, it is? Okay.
So beef fat so in terms of what's liquid at room temperature, so the only animal fats that are liquid at room temperature are duck and goose fat. And so they start to get liquid around 72, 73 degrees. Pork fat is next, and this is why it's the ideal. It's soft enough to not be – it's pretty soft and neutral, which is why it's the ideal. Beef fat off of cuts of beef is one step higher in terms of being solid and saturated. Kidney, like suet, is it's basically tallow. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the problem of deer fat, which is something we should probably talk about.
Yes.
So deer fat, I hear all over the country, oh, deer fat tastes terrible. Well, it doesn't actually taste terrible. You're conflating flavor with mouthfeel. And, unless you're a professional, you can be forgiven for that. But so what's the deer fat when it's super hot and crispy? Like if you did a steak on the grill that has got a rind of really good fat, it's going to be fantastic as long as it's hot. But as soon as it cools down a bit, it still will taste fine. But there's a particular composition of deer fat that's very high in stearic acid, which is a very, very long chain fatty acid that does not break down very well. So it coats your mouth. And that's what everybody's talking about. It just coats your mouth, and there's this kind of kind of feeling that you need, like, red wine will help, or something acidic will cut through it. But it's generally not very pleasant. Mm-hmm. But because it has some excellent flavor to it, I will put a little bit in my venison charcuterie. So if I'm making a batch of venison sausages, there's going to be the dominant fat's going to be pork fat, but I will put a little bit, maybe in a 5-pound batch, maybe a 1/4 pound of chopped up deer fat in there, and it helps you. It makes the sausage more distinctive. So in other words, it's a deer sausage and not just a sausage, which could be any meat,
Got it. Yeah, no, I've heard that a lot about deer fat. I've heard it spoils real quick too.
It does. It's very high in omega 6s or omega 3s. It's omega 3s. Because obviously deer and elk they eat lots and lots of grass and browse, and so that generally non-grain based diet, unless you're shooting whitetails in cornfields, that makes that fat very, very rich in omega 3 fatty acids, and they're relatively volatile, so they can go rancid much faster than than the fat on a grain-fed steer. So to the point where if you're processing a deer and you hang it with the skin off, you're gonna want to trim off all of the fat that was touching the air while you were aging the deer, because it will have gone rancid.
Okay.
But in the freezer, it'll keep vacuum sealed for a year and be fine. But it will deteriorate a little bit faster.
Got it. Well, cool. Um, I had another question for you, and it's eluded my brain since we've been talking because I had it about 10 minutes ago. Um, and I'm sure I'll remember as soon as I get off the phone with you here. But tell me, what hunts you got coming up this year, other than the coues deer?
Well, I'm trying to get out to the coast to chase after Columbia blacktail,
Hmm.
but the spot where I had planned to hunt, my friend who lives there says he hasn't seen a buck in 2 weeks, so that's no bueno. So, but the
No.
season lasts until the middle of September, so I've still got some chances in that. I'm going to be in your neck of the woods on Labor Day.
Nice.
I'm going to be at Yuma I'm going to be a judge at the World Dove Cook-Off in Yuma,
Wow.
Arizona on the 2nd of September. So we'll be chasing doves there for 3 or 4 days, and then after that, I will be in chasing ptarmigan in Colorado, and then prairie chickens in Kansas. And then I've got a deer hunt a mule deer hunt here in California scheduled for October.
Nice.
I'm going to chase prairie chickens again, this time in South Dakota, also in October. Trying to think if I've got any other. Those are the big game hunts I've got planned, but I'm going to be chasing after a lot of small game, and
Yeah.
then when our duck season starts. Our duck season starts in October, but it really starts after Thanksgiving, and then it's kind of all ducks all the time from Thanksgiving until the end of January.
Cool. I haven't done a lot of duck hunting in the last few years.
You're kind of not in a great spot for it.
Well, it's actually not that bad. Arizona's not terrible.
It's not great. I mean, I know guys who shoot ducks, but
it's not great. It's not. It's definitely not.
it's not like Oklahoma or North Carolina or
No,
California.
definitely not. And I can tell, I haven't been in a long time as goose hunting. I've actually only went one time before, like actual just for goose. I've killed geese before, but it was wild duck hunting or just waterfowling in general, and it was like a opportunistic moment, but not like with a big layout, couple hundred decoys laid out and stuff like that. I'd love to do that one of these days. Yeah, it's just, here's the thing, I get so many get out of jail free cards with my wife, and it's like you dangle goose in front of me and then you dangle elk in front of me, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go elk hunting. Dude,
you have 3 elk tags this year. I think that's a bit much.
Nah. You won't be saying that when I send you some meat.
You should have plenty of it. I've still got elk from February. You should try that spring goose hunt.
I have a good friend of mine that runs goose hunts in Saskatchewan, and he's been asking me to go out for years.
See, a spring hunt won't mess with your deer hunting.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think this year is going to work out because I'm 85% sure this spring, February I'm still going to be deer hunting, but in March I'm going, more than likely going to Argentina, shoot a red stag.
Oh, nice.
So I'm still working on that. If you want in on that, let me know. I got an opening. I'm working on that deal right now, but it was supposed to be for my 40th birthday, and I'm going to turn 42. So, it's one of these things I've been trying to get the plans done, and it's finally coming to a head now. But it's one of my bucket list items is shooting a red stag with my bow. So,
yeah, kind of. If I ever do that, I think I want to do it in Scotland.
Scotland, yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're native there, and it's my home country. So,
nice.
that'd be kind of the icing on the cake.
Do they have much hunting there for them though? I thought it was like super, super limited.
No, it's actually not that limited. I mean, I get the sense that if you want a real serious, like, holy crap, it's a red stag, that you go to places like New Zealand or Argentina. But right. I'm not. I mean, it's more important to me it would be more important for me to hunt it in Scotland than it would be to have a giant animal.
Right. I know I've been talking to a buddy of mine, Brandon, and he he went roe deer hunting was it last year? It was last year.
The teeny deer.
Yeah. Back on the other side of the pond. And I think that's something I'd definitely like to go do, kind of like.
Well, get the slam. Start at the muntjac deer and start at muntjac, which are micro deer. They're from India. They're running around the hedgerows in Great Britain. And then roes are the one step up. And then fallow is one step up from that. And that's also not native. Roe deer is native. And then the red stag are the quasi elk.
Right. Yeah, I'd love to do it. Of course, that's all cost prohibitive for me, but it's a matter. It's a matter of what I can and can't do. But that'd be awesome. That stuff interests me. It interests me way more than going to like Africa or something like that. I don't know. It's funny. I don't know why what it is about Africa doesn't. Here's
what going. I think it's because it's a totally controlled environment where I finally have a line on a possibility to go to Africa where it actually does sound interesting. There's a taxidermist down near Cape Town, and his service is Blue Diker, Duiker, and I just met him at the Beretta Gallery when I was doing a book event in New York City, and he's like, "Yeah, come down to the ranch, hang out, and we'll do some hunting." And the way he described it, he's mostly a bird hunter, but there's, random like impalas and stuff running around. That sounds more like the experience that I'd be interested in where, it's not a safari, it's just going to somebody's place and chasing birds around and, oh, look, there's an antelope and I don't know if it's tags or whatever. I've got a tag for an antelope. Sure. Let's shoot it and eat it, as opposed to, I'm feeling a little. At least me personally, I'd feel a little uncomfortable being kind of great white hunter guy.
Me too. I don't know.
It's kind of not a. It's not a rule. I mean, I don't begrudge anybody who wants to.
Me either.
But it's just not my thing.
Yeah, I was saying, it just doesn't float my boat. Although I gotta say, would love to go shoot a big cat, which of course is the biggest.
I like cats.
biggest taboo out of all of them. But
there's mountain lion hunting in this country. You can go to like.
Oh yeah, I've gone mountain lion hunting. I've shot two, but
okay. Did you eat them?
Yeah, no. I did. I had back straps, and one of my employees, I gave them a roast, and she made I'm gonna call it like a barbacoa type.
More like a carnitas because it's a lighter meat, right?
Yeah, but yeah, something to that effect, and it was pretty good. It was good. The backstraps were really good. And then I gave a lot to my cousin because he seemed to really like it. And he did a bunch of like, stuff on the grill with it. And,
isn't it sort of porky? I've never eaten it.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's very pork-like. It looks like pork when you cook it, to be honest with you. So it's definitely not my favorite, but it's not the worst. I've had other stuff like my ibex that was better suited for shoe leather than eating. But
I had an oryx once that was pretty tough.
Yeah, because I don't eat anything but gravel and freaking sticks.
It's entirely possible. A friend of mine shot it in New Mexico. It's that crazy New Mexico hunt that you get.
Right. Yeah.
The white sands. Yes, exactly. And and it was good, but it was like, it was kind of tough.
Yeah, half my sheep is still in the freezer too because that thing tastes like freaking disgusting.
An outad, or is it a bighorn?
No, it's a bighorn, desert bighorn.
You're only the second person I've ever heard of who didn't like wild sheep. I mean, when I'm talking about like the bighorn complex.
Yeah, no, not a fan. Wasn't a fan of the aoudad either.
It's now like 100 people said like the sheep was the greatest venison they've ever had to like you and a friend of mine from Oregon.
Well, I think if maybe it's the difference between desert bighorn and eating Rocky Mountain bighorn, because Rocky Mountain bighorn actually eat food and not rocks. If I took you to where I shot,
cactus is food.
There's no cactus. There's nothing. There's black lava rocks and little itty bitty like sprouts of stuff that just crack through the floor that they eat. I don't know how they live. I really don't.
That's a bucket list for me. I mean, did I tell you I got a hack? So a friend of mine told me that they have ewe hunts in Montana. And that they're pretty easy to draw. So I got like a couple of different. I bought a preference point this year, and I'm going to actually put in for the hunt next year. And I don't care if it's got a full on curl. I kind of want to eat a sheep.
Right.
And this is something I could afford, and I can probably physically do, and yeah, I'm all about it. I'm stoked actually for that. And then maybe I can graduate for the full curl, because they're so hard to get those tags.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I got super lucky, man. I mean, I was so far behind the point maximum point pool that, not so far, but I was pretty darn far behind. There really didn't have much of a mathematical chance to draw, but I drew.
Nice. I've got 10 points in California.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see Cali's pretty. Are you putting in for a California bighorn or the desert bighorn?
Well, there's only one hunt. It's all. I guess it's.
I thought it's two there.
I don't know. I think it's all.
No. That's Nevada. I think. Maybe
okay, yeah. It's. I think they're all deserts, and they live in the Sierra Nevada in Southern California.
Okay. I gotta look, because I don't know. I want to say there's two there.
You could be right.
I don't know. It would behoove me that the California bighorn doesn't live in California, or maybe they just don't have hunts for it. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's crazy though. There's like 9,000 guys put in for like 16 hunts.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's pretty much the same countrywide. All the sheep hunts are just ridiculous. You got better chance of winning the lottery. But well, cool, man. I'm glad we finally caught up and got you on here.
Yeah.
Hopefully, when you come out for your deer hunt, I can meet up with you and help you out on that. But
that'd be great. I'm gonna. My plan is to drive, because that way I think it'll just be easier than if I'm gonna try and fly in and fly out.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It's not. I mean, it's not a terrible drive. I've driven it. It's been a long time since I've driven it, but I've driven from Phoenix all the way, like, up past Carmel.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, from my house to Phoenix is about 15 hours.
Okay.
It's a ways, so I'll break it up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at least this way you'll have your vehicle to get the meat back. It's a lot easier than trying to ship it and freeze it, and So.
Exactly. Well, cool. Well, good luck on your elks.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And I mean, one thing that's sort of going forward is anybody listening to this, it's important for me to always be accessible to help, hunters and anglers and foragers do more and do better with what they bring home. So I try to make myself very available through all the social media channels. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as Hunt Gather Cook. I'm on Twitter by my name, Hank Shaw. And I try to answer every question I ever get. But if I'm in the field, it won't be the same day.
Right. Check out his website. Check out the books. I need to get myself a book. I need to give it to my wife so she can cook some.
Well, when we see each other, I'll bring you some.
All right. Sounds good, man. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.